We're going to talk about the Eliza Fletcher case, the case out of Memphis, Tennessee, that's gotten a lot of headlines for all the wrong reasons this week. Really tragic case of a school teacher who was apparently murdered. The suspect who's being charged with this crime is Cleotha Henderson, who was arraigned earlier this week. He was actually arraigned twice. The first time on kidnapping charges when Miss Fletcher was still missing, and then after her remains were discovered, he was later charged with murder. There were two arraignments this week. Let's talk a little bit about what an arraignment is. An arraignment is basically the very beginning of the criminal prosecution against the accused. That means that the charges that the defendant is facing are formally read to them in open court. It also sets in motion timelines and deadlines that the prosecution and the defense and the court will adhere to throughout the case. It's really more of a formality. Generally, it's the opportunity for the defendant to plead guilty or not guilty. It's almost unheard of for any defendant to plead guilty at the arraignment unless a negotiated plea was already worked out or something like that. I can't imagine why someone would plead guilty at the arraignment stage, because at the arraignment, all of their due process rights kick in. From that point forward, there'll be motions and other things that the defense is entitled to challenge any evidence against him. But this week we had arraignments twice in this case. Patrick, he was originally charged with kidnapping charges and then for the additional charges of first-degree murder. We don't have degrees of murder in every state. I know in Georgia we don't do degrees, but what do you know about first-degree murder in Tennessee?
Yeah, the first-degree murder charge in Tennessee, there's three ways that that an action or a murder would fall under the statute. And that's one, if it's premeditated and intentional. Two, if it's a killing of another person while you're in the perpetration of or attempt to perpetrate any other crime that's enumerated in the statute, such as terrorism, arson, rape, robbery, burglary, theft, in this case, kidnapping, physical abuse, and various other crimes. And then the third way would be using some kind of a bomb or a destructive device. And those are the ways that you can get charged with it. The interesting thing is the second two ways, and in this case, this would fall under the second method, which would be the murder of someone while engaged in a kidnapping. It does not require a culpable mental state. So that means that if
explain to people what culpable mental state means. That's a term we use as attorneys a lot, but what does the court mean by that?
So under the first one, it says premeditated or intentional killing. You have to have the intent and premeditate the killing. That's the culpable mental state, is the intent element and the premeditation. The second category does not require that. So if, for instance, somebody's engaged in a kidnapping and the person fights back and you end up killing that person, then you're going to satisfy the elements of the crime.
Okay, so basically, normally first-degree murder is going to require an intent to kill, premeditated intent to kill. But you can also charge first-degree murder in Tennessee if someone dies while you're committing an act that falls in one of those categories, in this case, kidnapping. So we don't know a lot of details at this time about how Miss Fletcher died at the hands of Mr. Henderson, allegedly. But for instance, if it was an accidental death, let's say that he put her in the trunk and he didn't intend for her to die, but she died from a heat stroke or something of that nature, or suffocated, it still wouldn't matter. That's not an intentional killing necessarily, but it would fall under first-degree murder in Tennessee because it happened while he was committing this other felony. So what is the potential sentencing if he is indeed convicted of these crimes at a later date?
So there's only three sentencing schemes in the statute. If you're convicted for first-degree murder, you shall be punished, which in the law, when we see the term shall, that means a must, basically, that you either get the death penalty, imprisonment for life without the possibility of parole, or imprisonment for life with the possibility of parole.
Okay, so if he is convicted of first-degree murder at some point, it's going to be a very lengthy sentence. At a minimum, it will be a life sentence. The only question is whether or not he will get parole at some point. And then it could also potentially be a death sentence in Tennessee. Now, I understand that there might be some issues with the death penalty in Tennessee right now. Is it my understanding that Tennessee is currently has a stay on any executions? What's going on with that?
Yeah, so evidently the Governor Bill Lee of Tennessee suspended all executions in May of this year of 2022. He put a stay on all scheduled executions because when they do an execution, they rely on a 3-drug cocktail that they give the person sentenced to death. And there was a concern that the Tennessee Department of Corrections was not testing this drug cocktail for the presence of endotoxins, which could cause some kind of unforeseeable side effects. And the potential there was a challenge to this cocktail that it would violate or be in violation of the Eighth Amendment protection against cruel and unusual punishment.
Yeah, and we've seen that in other states, including Georgia. I remember Georgia's cocktail, and I hate using that word. It sounds crass, but that's what it's always referred to. But the combination of drugs that they were using to execute defendants was being challenged as potentially being painful or harmful to the defendants. And I remember a few years ago that a similar challenge was brought against Georgia's combination of drugs. So we'll have to see what happens with this. A lot of politics are involved in these kinds of cases as the public is clamoring for some type of justice here. And Tennessee is a death penalty state, which currently, as of this moment, is not executing prisoners. I don't know if that's going to be a prohibition on trying to sentence people to the death penalty, but we'll have to see what happens with this. As of the time of this recording, I don't believe they've announced whether they intend to seek the death penalty as of yesterday. I know that they weren't making any announcements on that at this time, but obviously a very public tragedy that's happened that's shocked the entire nation. And we will continue to follow this as new reports come out. But as of right now, we're at the very beginning stages of this case. So we've just had an arraignment that's happened. And apparently there was not a plea given yesterday. We don't know exactly why, but Mr. Henderson did not plead guilty or not guilty. I think it may have something to do with the attorney who had, for reasons we don't know, already filed a motion to withdraw. That was the public defender there in that system. So maybe they were concerned that they would have some kind of challenge for inadequate counsel or something like that if his attorney was on the way out for whatever reason, and they'll allow him to enter that plea at a later date. So we'll continue to follow it. Anything else on this, Pat?
No, I think that covers it.
All right, man. Let's go get some work done. Have a great weekend.